Chapter 15, verse 1, John says, "And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels, 7 of them, having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God." Because when we look at the wrath of God in the 7-year Great Tribulation, God's wrath will be completed when he pours out these 7 last plagues. And this means that these plagues are going to be the most strongest, and this is where God's wrath is going to be complete. He will pour this wrath upon the inhabitants of the earth because they rejected him and because they did not obey him. They did not heed the warnings of the angels of preaching the gospel and the angel who warned everyone to not accept the mark of the beast. So God's wrath will be filled in these last 7 plagues, okay? But before we look at this, we must understand that, or before we continue here, we must understand where we're at here. We're in the book of Revelation, and we're at about the middle of the 7-year Great Tribulation. We have seen that at the beginning of the Great Tribulation, sure, the great multitude was raptured up, that's us. Then the 2 witnesses were killed and taken up to heaven. Then we see the 144,000 Jews on Mount Zion with Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ takes them to heaven at the middle of the 7-year Great Tribulation. That's a type of a rapture. So since the saints essentially have gone to heaven, God sent an angel to preach the everlasting gospel. And now we're at the middle of the 7-year Great Tribulation. We're still at about the middle of the 7-year Great Tribulation. So as we continue here, we must understand where we're at. And John says, "And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire." But then it says, "And them that had gotten the victory over the beast," that's the Antichrist, "and over his image," because he was going to force people to worship his image, "and over his mark," the mark of the beast, "and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass." So they're standing on the sea of glass that is mingled with fire, so they're not being hurt. They're in heaven. And they're having the harps of God. And here's an image or a picture of what John might have seen. Here's the fire. And they have the harps, okay? This lady here has the harp, okay? And they are standing on the sea of glass. Here you can see them standing on the sea of glass. And notice the harps. Because the question is, who are they? Now I will say right off the bat that I think it's the 144,000 Jews that were taken up to heaven by Jesus Christ. Because if we continue to verse number 3, we read, "And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God." And I think this ties in the Jews to Moses, of course. Well, we are just strictly tied into Jesus Christ, the Gentiles. The Jews also look to Moses. Of course, we don't deny Moses, or we don't, forget the fact that God used Moses. Of course not. But they sing the song of Moses, and I believe this is a hint from God telling us this are the 144,000. Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, because of course they follow the Lamb. They serve the Lamb, Jesus Christ, saying, "Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints." Jesus is the King of all the saints, and every single one of us, whether it be Gentile or Jew, we're all his saints. Now I want to go back to chapter 14, verse 2 here. And this is where Jesus took the 144,000 to heaven. For John says that he heard the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. So they had harps. And in Revelation 15 they had harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the 4 beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000, which were redeemed from the earth. So it's interesting that they're singing a song and that they have harps. And when we see this group here in Revelation 15, they have the harps of God, and they are singing a song. Okay, but this time is a song of Moses. So I believe it's them. What's interesting is that it says that they had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, right? Well, I believe it's because they were taken up to heaven before the Antichrist did anything to them. That's why they had the victory. It's not like they were killed by the Antichrist, or else they wouldn't have the victory. But instead they had the victory because they were not affected by the Antichrist. They didn't have to worship his image, or even be threatened to worship his image. So they had the victory, and they're standing on the sea of glass. And if we go to Revelations 4:6, we see that, and before the throne, right before the throne of the presence of our God, there was a sea of glass, like unto crystal. And I believe this is where they're standing in. They stand on the sea of glass. That means that they are before the throne of God, before his presence. And we go back to chapter 14, verse 3. They sung, as it were, a new song before the throne, which means that they're standing on the sea of glass. So that's why I believe that they pretty much are the 144,000. And it says, verse 3, and they sing the song of Moses. We talked about this. And of the Lamb, saying, great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For thou only art holy, because God is holy. For all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest. Because if you remember, at the very beginning of this chapter, we see that these 7 angels have the 7 last plagues. So the wrath of God is about to be poured out on earth. This is why we read, for thy judgments are made manifest. And with this, we'll end the first part of Revelation chapter 15, ending in verse 4, and we'll continue in verse 5 in the next video. God bless you.